Hi there, I'm Dr. Jill Wener. I am a physician, meditation teacher, tapping coach, and creator of the Conscious Anti-Racism podcast. And I'm an aspiring anti-racist, which requires constant reevaluation and attention. And I'm here, like, this is the interview that I have been so excited about. This is Paige Ingram. She's an organizer, strategist, and facilitator. And she was one of the co-facilitators at the anti-racism retreat that I attended in this spring of 2019, which really started my anti-racist journey, even though I thought I was on it before. I really wasn't. And Paige just like was all the things. And even though we haven't until this interview gotten to speak directly since then, she has formed me every step along the way of this journey. And I'm just so freaking excited to be interviewing you, Paige. And she's been up to all sorts of stuff. So let's get into it. Paige, if you want to talk a little bit about who you are and what it is that you have been up to recently.
Like spring 2019, does that not feel like 5 years ago?
Yeah. A whole different universe.
A whole different universe. So I have been steady working as really just directing, organizing for an organization called Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. And we just really been focused on integrating and like being very explicit about speaking about organizing and justice making through and liberation through faith and through spirituality, and that those two things are inextricably tied together. And so that's like my W-2. That's like my like 9 to 5. That's not ever actually 9 to 5. Maybe sometimes it's 9 to 9, but that's just like the nature of the work. And then wow, I've been since then doing a lot of work with Southerners on New Ground, which is an LGBTQ multiracial base building organization that has like I'm still processing how much that has like doing work with them has like formed my understandings about what's possible, especially around like multiracial organizing. And I mean, since the pandemic, I have been in Minneapolis, and that has been for a person that does like a lot of national organizing and that has spent like so much time like facilitating, going to convenings, going to trainings, just like showing up in, I don't know, in Greensboro because someone's like, hey, I need some extra capacity. And I'm like, well, I can do my work from anywhere and I can help. So being in one place, being in this place, for so many weeks and now months at a time has been really humbling. And I mean, what more intense way to plug in seriously into local work than during a pandemic? I had been like really based on relationships, like supporting different efforts and campaigns locally, but I had not actually really like taken on something hardcore from beginning to end. And so that's like where I am now is balancing this digital work around faith and spirituality, and then like throwing down locally doing things that I literally never thought that I would be doing.
Like what? I mean, for anyone listening who isn't aware of what has been going on in Minneapolis and continues to go on,
I'll give it the TLDR.
but okay.
The TLDR.
I need to know what TLDR means because I'm 43. Can you please?
Okay. So like, you know, when you like when people are sharing like really long articles or really long posts, and they're like, okay, for those who think that it's too long and they didn't read it, TLDR. Here's the summary. So the TLDR for what has been happening in Minneapolis is that Minneapolis, the Twin Cities we have experienced a multitude really of high profile police shootings of innocent people and unarmed people. So Jamar Clark, there was an occupation that was in 2015. Then we had Philando Castile, which was in a suburb of St. Paul, And so like all along the way, we have people who are in their 30s or still in their 20s, who have been part of these really humongous like flashpoint moments, and learning lessons and like building together. And so George Floyd was murdered by, the way that I say is more than just one police officer.
Yeah.
One police officer had his neck or his knee on George Floyd's neck. And George Floyd is saying that he can't breathe. He is calling out for his dead mother, and was killed while other police officers were essentially standing by and watching and protecting the police officer. And that was all because of a allegedly counterfeit money that he used at a corner store. And so really this is another example that was made very plain of all sorts of issues around policing and police reform not working. Minneapolis is viewed as this like liberal metropolis, and it's not so. And so these organizers have been really pushing for a long time to defund MPD. I was part of a project in the early stages called MPD 150. And we were all about, using the 150th anniversary of the Minneapolis Police Department to really expose like how much that department is not working and how much like policing is not helping. There's been youth organizers for years who have been pushing to eliminate and remove SROs, which are police officers in schools. They call them school resource officers. So these are like armed cops that are in schools. And so there's been tons of push by organizers around that. And then you have a coalition of organizers, and I'll also say like Black Visions Collective in particular, who is like a Black queer organization, who have been like organizing around these elected officials that we brought into office in this like most recent city council election. That was monumentous. We have 2 Black trans people who are part of our city council. And so the question is, now that you're in office and the masses are saying like policing is not working, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And so that is like the story arc of kind of like where we are now. But all along the way, there have been tremendous like protests like happening constantly. Like, I don't know who's protesting. I just know there's a protest happening. So people are just gathering and collecting, and people are meeting. And the site where George Floyd got killed literally turned into a community space that was autonomous, where there were literally buses that were like blocking off entry points so that you could only get in by foot. There was DJs and food and flowers and healers who were offering all sorts of support. And it was, the whole thing has been incredibly organic and super exciting, and all rooted in very intentional work that's been going on for a long period of time. So I was over here literally like being the art director to make like, I forgot, like 80-foot banners to be dropped, and just like, I don't know, helping to like decorate this like swag that we're going to be using for that really big, we did like a really big march. It had like 10,000 people, where we confronted the mayor, Jacob Fry of Minneapolis, and asked him straight up, are you down to defund the police or not? And so like, I mean, I'm talking about learning how to sew on YouTube, to like sew, buying out Joanne fabric of like all these, you know, and painting and collaborating with artists and doing quick and dirty direct action trainings, and you know, just like buying out Target of all of their fire extinguishers and just like dropping them off at all these different sites. And then just like the realness of like being on the street and like really supporting like regular folks that were like, this is not okay. And we're coming out, and we're not regulated by any particular organization, but this is what we want to do. And so like showing up and being like, wow, there's a National Guard that's like occupying these areas, and like, how do we keep each other safe? But I also don't want to regulate anybody and tell them how they should be feeling or what they should be doing. And so like, at times it felt chaotic, but also like it just kind of like felt like we had a collective buy-in that was not just like the same folks that we see at community meetings and at community things. And so that like I'm still like so inspired by what's happening, and what continues to happen. So Minneapolis is, I mean, we got cred now. I'm like, it took all these years. I'm like, we're over here, you know, like taking over the biggest mall in the country and like shutting down the airport and like all these things. But in this moment, everybody knows that things are going down here, and it's really exciting to see people really getting the credit that's due.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, because I've known you've been from Minneapolis, and we were just talking before we started interviewing or before we're recording. I was just like, I get the New York Times headlines, and there was an article, and there was a thing of a march in a protest in Minneapolis, and at the front holding the sign is Paige Ingram. And I was like, is that Paige? Because you're wearing your head covering. And so I kind of thought, but I'm like, I shouldn't just assume. And so I reached out to someone else who was on our retreat, and he said, yes, that's definitely her. So that was just the coolest moment. I mean, it's just like,
that was me.
Yeah.
And I corrected those signs, and I was up until 1:00 in the morning making these signs. So I'll be darned if they're not looking on point and really sharp. Yeah. And that was when we confronted them there. It was like a ridiculous experience. It was just amazing. And then I think the next day or the day, it could have been more than a couple of days after, was when we convened all of the city council members who were in support of moving forward to defund the police. So
that's amazing.
It was literally like a whirlwind.
Yeah, I will. I'll post the link to that article in the show notes. So so when you're like, I mean, this is the kind of stuff, like I remember when I was going on the retreat a year and a half ago, and I was like, oh God, what if I have to become an activist? I don't want to be an activist. Like, I don't even know who I am. You know, like I was just like so afraid to do anything. But in my mind still, even though I know activism takes different forms, activism still feels like you should be like on the ground in the middle of it all with the people and signs and marching and protests and everything. Like you're doing the like real deal stuff. What does it take to make that happen? I mean, I've seen some of your posts on social media, like we need blankets and we need like food and water bottles. What does it actually take to get, I know you're not like the one person organizing all of it, but how does that get coordinated? I mean, you were saying, of course, there's been like 3 years, I think you said 3 years or longer behind leading up to this of organization in Minneapolis that provided the infrastructure for this. But what, for those of us who are just like doing nothing and wanting to know what to do, or doing some things, but not what you're doing, or feeling like, what is that even like? What does that look like? Can you, I mean, you already did a little bit, but like, how does that work?
Yeah. So like part of like what really made that possible was a ton of back end work. Like literally just like dozens and dozens of Black organizers who were gathering together on Zoom calls and being like, okay, this is the area that I'm taking on. I'm doing healing. this, like, I'm doing resource stuff, I'm doing like policy, this, and then like people just going where they needed to go. And I think like that in and of itself felt really important because there were buckets of work and no one person ideally would feel like they needed to carry it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like people, I think that like people who are kind of like new to this, we're really paying attention. I mean, like I feel like I can't overestimate how important social media is right now. Just like being able to keep track of like what's going on, and like where people are at.
Mm-hmm.
It, you know, like there's a community meeting, you know, come to the park and bring a blanket and just like show your support. And then you'll probably end up being asked like sign a petition or do something, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so like just like going where the people are, especially in a whirlwind, this is a unique situation. Like this is not necessarily like what I would tell somebody like living in a place where there's like not a crisis happening. But certainly in these moments, it's just like there is like a continuous open invitation to just show up.
Yeah.
And also like there are like very material things like people need, or like skills that people need. Oh my gosh, like literally like just having people who are like, oh, I'm a printer and I'm like happy to help.
Yeah.
And just like knowing that there is like somebody that when we need, you know, 1,000 t-shirts made, that we can like reach out to these like 4 different vendors and be like, hey, we need t-shirts. Because like that, like there's something about like, you know, having tangible things that like reminds you about like why you're doing what you're doing. Or like, you know, people can like go and wheat paste and like put different signs and things on trees. Like we were working on all of these resources to like help to ground people when they were like in that space, in that community space where George Floyd was murdered. Like that, just like being able to like have people on deck to really just like help out and just like show up, and then be like, okay, cool, what is the next thing? Great, I will be there. Like when people are like, we need you to talk at a city council meeting, and you have something to say related to that thing, like go and talk. And I think like the thing that I am always like really encouraging people to do is like to push yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like when there are moments where there's like a lot of opportunities and you have time, like push yourself to like do a little bit more than what you would normally do. Like these are times to like really like stretch yourself. And like some of the best and deepest relationships that I've built have been like in moments like these where you're just like collaborating and working together towards something that's bigger than yourself. And so like the more that you can do that and be in relationship with people, the better. In the long run.
Yeah.
Churches offering space like in their parking lots, or like, you know, it takes a lot of space to like make a banner. Like, you know, and so it's like, who can do that? Like who can make a run to get the supplies? Or, you know, like it's just like there is not a lacking of things to do. I think that at times there's like a lacking of relationship. And so I think like anytime that you can be like, yes, I want to commit to like growing this, like I want to grow this relationship between myself and this organization, or my congregation, or my group in this local org, and you're serious about it, like just go for it. Just like shoot your shot and see what happens.
How do you make sure that like, because if you change, a protest is a protest on its own without, I mean, it like there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but how do you work towards lasting change as a result of it? And what changes have you all started to see? Because I know there was all sorts of stuff happening in the city council.
Mm-hmm.
has that continued to move forward, and how do you use protests for an end point or a stopping point along the way towards an end point?
Yeah, I mean, there are a multitude of tactics that are needed to make change. And I think that the most important thing to be mindful of is like how much can we kind of like be in communication and working together towards the thing. How can we get clear about like what the thing is that we're wanting? And like protests in this context are absolutely humongous. Like that is, having a mass protest movement cannot be understated enough. And I think that it's interesting how much resistance there still is to protest, and how we can like both simultaneously use protests from like specific people in a specific time and be like, this is the epitome of what you should be doing. But then it's actually not okay when we do it because of whatever, right? So the MLK example, I think that there's just like such a lacking of historical understanding about like, this was a sustained thing over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just like marching across a bridge, it was like civil disobedience, it was people getting arrested, it wasn't just like the people who with the church closed, it was also like there's also like a whole Black Power movement that was happening that was also incredibly important. And so like getting like, there's a whole ecosystem out there of resistance. So for every you know, like for every like bit of like messed up power that there is out there, for every institution, for every whatever, or even like individual interpersonal power dynamics that are really messed up, there's also resistance that's happening. And so like I think that protests are the most visible way, in my mind, of showing communal solidarity towards something. And that's what made this uprising, that's what made this an uprising versus another flashpoint moment.
Yeah.
Was that there was a collective feeling of just like being fed up and I think like so much more clarity about something that people have been like anxious or worried about vocalizing, which is like the police are not like actually making our community safer, and we need to stop with this. And so like, to me, like that, like being hyper visible and being like diligent and unapologetic about not just like what you are against, but what you are for, is like really critical. And so yes, we're saying defund the police, but we're also or divest from the police, but we're also saying that you need to be investing in these things, and that we are just as well versed about what needs to be invested in as what needs to be divested from.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I realized like up until like just like looking at the statistics about like how much people are really in alignment about this across the country, and also like around the world there have been like protests happening. I was just in Milwaukee. They literally have been protesting every day.
Wow.
When I was there last week, it was day 67 and they have not stopped. So every single day people are going out to different neighborhoods. They have different targets. I happened to go during a day where there was a Blue Lives Matter something or other happening at a bar with the chief of police of Milwaukee. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, and that group of people who meet every day and walk are a community now. They have their rituals that they do, how they start and how they end their marches. they're sharpening their understanding about what it is that they are advocating for and asking about. And you know, and they've like found their place where they feel like I'm being active.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that whole thing about, I mean, I feel like people experience this in religious settings, at sports games, at schools, feeling like you're a part of something else and like actively like being with people. There's nothing like it. And that's the importance of protest, and it can't end there. So some of the things that like we've seen, I mentioned about organizing our city council members to to actively say that they are like for defunding the police. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has also been like very vocal about that as well. And so we got as far as trying to get our charter changed. And then they voted to, I believe, that they voted to like have some sort of like period of like gathering information, whatever. So people are upset about that, and there's work moving around that. There's also all sorts of work going on around building alternative systems. Mm-hmm. So that's also important. So like different groups of a lot of times masculine folks, mostly like a lot of cis men, who are organizing themselves to like be like patrolling their neighborhoods and their areas. That has been something that like gives people a sense of safety, and arguably more of a sense of safety than like having the police around.
Right.
There's all sorts of movement around transformative justice. One of the biggest questions that people get is like around like assault, like sexual assault. And the biggest advocates that I know are all saying like transformative justice is actually a solution, in that, you know, you can watch Law and Order SVU and know that like most people that have experienced that don't receive justice in this criminal justice system. And it also doesn't do anything towards prevention. Mm-hmm. And so solutions that are about preventing harm before it happens, that's what we're advocating for. And so people are doing all sorts of work to make that happen. And then also like really dope things happen like right away. Like the Minneapolis public school system canceling their contract with the Minneapolis Police Department. St. Paul students, you know, advocating for the same thing. And like those are the types of responses that I see from institutions where I'm like, yes, this is great.
Yeah.
What I really don't care about at this point is anything, like any sort of like media campaign to tell us about how you support Black people.
Right.
Because to me, that is just an indication that you're not clear about what the problem is. Mm-hmm. The problem is like what the ask is. The ask is not like for visible support from corporations about like saying that you support us. It's about actually seeing sustained change happening, and shifts in power structure. And it doesn't just mean like hiring a Black person. It's much deeper than that. And so so like that, like these are the types of changes that are all happening at the same time, not to mention all of the amazing cultural work that's going on. Mm-hmm. That I'm super excited to be a part of, is just like helping people and inviting people to activate their imaginations, to be like, okay, so everyone's talking about how we shouldn't have police, but then what do we have? And the thing that I always say is like, why is imagination only reserved for like our founding fathers? Like they were the only ones that got to like envision a society to live in, and then like implement it. There's something that's like so unfair about that, and it's so limiting. And so it's been cool to see these major like artistic and cultural interventions that are inviting people not just to like come and show up at a protest or come and show up for a meeting, but to really like transform the ways that we are thinking about things and what we've internalized.
Yeah.
Including like the police within ourselves, right? Like, and that's something that we all have to work on. So yeah.
I'm just taking notes here. I love everything you're saying. Talk a little bit, you started to get to this a little bit, or maybe the healing justice and self-care, because you and I had some pretty major conversations about meditation and spirituality on the retreat, which prompted my like gigantic white fragility moment where I had to go and just like lick my wounds and cry in my room. Right. And then that day I was like, let's rumble. So like these huge aha moments about spirituality and how that wellness has kind of been this white space, and getting out of that realm and understanding what it is to be a white wellness person in the space that you're creating, and why it's so important to have people that are not white for so many reasons. And then the work that's being done in this protest space about trauma and self-care. Talk a little bit about just a few light topics. So comment there as you like, please.
I'm super excited about that. You know, I think like the 28-year-old veterans, right, who like were occupying the 4th precinct for 18 days in November 5 years ago or whatever. Like we have like like all of these folks have like really been hyper aware of the tolls that these types of moments have on the body and on the spirit. And everyone, like, I remember like the first day when we just like all these like Black abolitionist organizers like got on this call, and folks are hyper aware of like what this means and like how we need to structure things differently so that folks can like tap in and tap out and have days off. And like it just like even that type of awareness can like completely shift the way that something looks. And even so, like I think that so many of us like took it way over the edge, including me. Like I'm just like chuckling because I was just like, okay, I'm gonna give this everything I got for a month. And I lasted about 3.5 weeks, and then I just like crashed and burned. But I felt
3.5 weeks.
3.5 weeks of like doing anything and everything, because but also just like being aware of like, this is what I'm telling myself. Like, I'm not falling into this. I am like with intention. I'm saying like, this is what I need to do, but also like, I don't need to be at every meeting. I don't need to be at everything.
Yeah.
So like I would, and like, man, like the care was just like so amazing. In fact, interestingly, and maybe this just has to do with like the networks that we're in, but we had so much support from like Black herbalists and healers in particular, who were, I was just like, I don't really know where people should send things, so just like send them to me. And if you know somebody who like wants to send something, you can just like give them my address, because I didn't want to put it out there for the world. But I mean, we were getting all sorts of things like teas and stuff to like help with just stress, and balms to like help to like heal like different wounds. Like people were getting messed up out there on the front lines, which were like youth who were out there, hijabi girls, teenagers were out there in the front confronting like police officers and getting tear gas and all of the things. And so like that was really amazing. One of the working groups that we had within this like Black abolitionist network that we're formulating now, it was like a healing justice group. And so there's like a whole Minnesota healing justice I don't know if coalition's the right word. I'll get you the info, but
Yeah.
there's a whole group of folks who are in a network together and really just like went into action and was like, well, people are congregating in this spot, and this spot, and this spot, and this spot. And so like, can we have folks that are there that are like holding folks and like doing rituals? Because essentially there were altars that were created. Not that everybody would call them that.
Yeah.
That's what was going on. Were like gigantic altars in the middle of like a major intersection. And so that was also something that like people were like, this is my role, this is my lane, and I'm going to go and like do this thing, and I'm going to show up. And there was all sorts of concerns about COVID and like PPE. And that really became a healing question, right? It's a health and wellness question of like, people are coming in droves and people are feeling all sorts of things and have various degrees of understanding about like all of it. And so like, how can we like make this as safe of a space as possible? And so like getting masks made, getting masks delivered, hand sanitation stations, and then the next thing you know, like there, you know, you have like different buildings that like created these amazing systems of like getting water to the outside so people could like fill their water bottles, they could wash their hands.
Wow.
Buses. The other thing that's popped off recently is that there has been like encampments of houseless people in the park that's like right over by where George Floyd was murdered. And there's been like a lot of action, a lot of movement to like provide these folks with like what they need. And so like, I say all that to say that people who would not consider themselves healers were really invested in doing healing work, which to me is about like prioritizing health of the mind, the body, and the spirit. And like being super innovative about it, which was like so amazing to see. Not to mention like, of course, like the food drives and like all of those things were in full effect all across the Twin Cities. And that was amazing. And yeah, like it just felt different. Like I remember like going to a comrade's house and being like, hey, I'm bringing breakfast stuff. Like I'm like, I'll come over and make breakfast and we can have breakfast together. And little did I know that when I walked in the door, they were just done like doing an exercise session for 30 minutes. And if 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Like people would just like be in it, not showering, not like eating horrible, like not horrible, but like eating things that are not actually bringing them to like their optimal state of being. They wouldn't be meditating. They wouldn't be like doing yoga. They wouldn't be exercising. But like we're learning, and I think like I'm always just like really thinking about like these people who have been doing sustained work for decades. I always think about like Palestinian organizers in particular who like have made these like lifelong commitments to resistance. And I'm like, what are they doing and how can we do that? Part of that, I think, part of the healing process that I think that we still have work to do is actually about like grounding ourselves politically. Like when you are grounded and you have an understanding about what you're doing and why, when you have an understanding about like the lineage that you come from, it makes the work that you're doing like more intentional. And I think like that is something that I have a personal commitment on. And I don't think that people have really thought about political education as something that's related to healing justice, but I certainly think that it is. Because that is something that's going to sustain us in our work for the long haul and put our minds at ease, because we know that like because we have such a robust understanding about why this is important, and that we are not the first and we're not the last.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, like where I would like to see some of our work headed is like, you know, there's nothing wrong with like nourishing like the analytical parts of our brains too.
I love
So
that. I love that. Okay, is there a role for white healers in this space? And if so, what is it? Because I know there's so many people that want to help and be active, but also becoming more and more aware that like that could cause more harm if not done so in a trauma sensitive way, trauma informed way. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, well, I am a person who strongly believes that there's a role for everybody, and that like finding out what that is and dedicating yourself towards that, it's important. So like, I think that first of all, I think that white people need a lot of healing.
Yeah.
Like a lot. I think that we've all had moments of like profound political awakening, and it can rock you to your core and have you really questioning not just like about yourself, but like about the people around you, about like everything. And so also I think that like for some white folks that are doing this work, they've really like found their place. And I think that there's like a lot of white people who are like, I really want to help and I don't know where, and they get into their heads about like, what does this mean if I do this or if I do that? And like that's also just like very stressful to be like to be stressing out about a situation or a scenario that hasn't actually happened. But we all do it. Like we all do it. So I'm like, what does it look like for like white people, for white folks that are committed to the like to movement in whatever way, to like really have space for spiritual grounding and uplifting? That is not something that's we are all human beings with spirits, is you know, that is my tradition. And so like we all need that sustenance, and white folks are included in that. But I think that there's like this thing about I've been like hearing like a lot of like military and like warrior kind of talk, you know, like as metaphors. I'm just a soldier. I'm just a, you know, I'm just a this. And it's like, no, you are also a whole human being, and we need people power for mass movements, and that includes you. And so like, I just think that is what I've identified. And like the faith spaces that I'm operating in are largely white liberal folks, and that's something that I continue to like wonder about. It's like, how can there be more pastoral care? How can there be more mindfulness? How can like, where can there be space for folks to like unpack what has happened? This is traumatic for people. Like it's traumatic for people like who live in the neighborhood. Like it's not the neighborhood that this happened in is not a particularly like Black or Latinx or Native neighborhood. It's really a mix. And there's like a lot of white people that are like really freaked out, and trying to like challenge their privilege, and also like just, I think, feeling a discomfort about being in an area where there's a lot of stuff happening. That's also a very American privilege, right? That like there's an expectation that like outside forces will not like come into your place where you live, and you know. So I see that as a role. I also think that like giving practitioners of color across the board, I don't know, giving them more of a platform, skilling them up and training them up, or helping them like with that process, like whatever it looks like. And also like if there are Black folks that you're in deep relationship with, and they are in need of healing, and they are willing to like have some sessions with you, like go for it. I think that it's a mixed bag of like people who are willing to like um experience like healing oriented things with white folks. I personally don't have a problem with it, and don't and well, it depends. It depends.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like about being in deeper relationship with people. And this is also like a very localized question. Like healing is a very personal and local thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so like what our community needs right now may look different than like what other communities need. I'm thinking about, you know what? I'm thinking about like election day.
Yeah. Ooh.
And you're gonna have people that are outside in lines, frustrated, because you know it's gonna be a hot mess. What are the I think like this is like when you level up in your activism, you start to forecast what you can see and what are interventions that you can make. And I'm like, everybody officially is like all into the presidential election. Like we got the VP person now. Like we're here, and we've been knowing where the fights are going to be, including in Georgia or in Atlanta. We saw it in the primaries, and so like, what are ways that we can intervene and just like support people as they're trying to make change in their communities? And so that might be like a really great intervention, whether it's like literally like being in the lines or offering things for people beforehand and afterwards. And gosh, it's going to be like, there is not going to be anything relaxing inherently about November. And depending on what happens,
Okay.
it will continue to be an incredibly difficult situation through January. I mean, like, there's so much that we don't know, but what we do know is that folks are having a hard time across the board, and that we are going to continue to need to be in a relationship with people. And like, sometimes healing just means like getting on a phone with somebody and being like, hey, let's talk, and like we'll each be going on a walk together. I just like want to hear how you're doing.
Yeah.
Like that nowadays, when you're just like constantly in Zooms and like constantly like it feels like the only interaction that you're having with folks is like people needing something from you. Think about like moms and parents right now.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot.
It's so interesting. And I went for a walk with a friend last night, and we were social distance and wearing masks, but there was one point where I was like, I feel like you're too close to me. And it was like, God, that's so sad that like, I am afraid for you to be like, what do I mean, she is a nurse. She was working at the COVID clinic all day testing people. So it's not like she said she was like strapped down with like 5 different masks and all this different gear, but like, that wasn't even it. Like, I just am so used to not being in proximity other than my partner and like his kids. That's it. Those are the only people that I'm close to still. So it's a very weird space. So my brain is starting to go with all these ideas for election day and stuff that we can do, like pre-recorded stuff that people can listen to or download.
A nice little election guided meditation.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I know you're settling for Biden, but it's okay. I don't know. I'm also a very jokey person, but
I love that. No, I love that so much, because that's exactly how I feel. Like, I'm like, I should donate money, I guess, but I'm just not excited about any of it. And I'm also afraid to just like have any hopes for November. Like, I'm afraid to get my heart broken again, like it. How are you dealing with that? Like, what is your mental approach to November?
Is it bad that I think that Trump's going to get reelected?
It's realistic.
There is a part of me that, like, there's a lot that I'm thinking of. Like, off the top, I'm just like, off the top, I feel consistently disappointed about the Democratic Party, and I have been for a long time. And I just feel like there are so many like fundamental structural changes about electoral politics that I think like need to happen.
Yeah.
And so like as a Black person who is like constantly around people who are like, you're Black, you need to vote, like your people literally died for this, and I hear this, and I also resonate with like people who are like, I mean, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how you're gonna tell somebody in Georgia that their vote counts? Like, you're gonna tell like people in Florida that their vote counts? And so like for me, I'm just like I'm in a constant state of um either like apathy or just like a real sense of confusion about like what does all of this actually mean, and do we actually have control over any of this? And I think that because of this lackluster situation that we're in with who we're stuck with in terms of the left, I just think that I think it's going to be hard. Not only that, but just like all of the struggles to get people to vote in a way that's actually safe, and like all of the fighting that's taken place and how difficult it'll be to for people to vote. Like I already know. And so you put all these barriers in the way for folks to vote for someone that they're not really excited about. I think that what hasn't changed is like people are excited about Trump, or at least just like excited about like, I don't know, voting for X conservative person. And so like I think that there is something real about where the energy is. And the energy is not on the left when at least like when it comes to this national election. And there is nothing that I can think of conceivably, like there's not a role that I feel like I can play to get folks more excited about like voting for Biden and Kamala Harris, to be honest. But I think that there are, what I'm excited about though is just like getting people, how can we get people more comfortable about talking about these things that they're uncomfortable about? Because until we start to air these things out and be like, these could be demands that we make to members of Congress that we have elected, to be like, are you working on getting rid of this electoral college?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so I think like that is where I want to put my energy, is to be like, cool, black women, let's talk about Kamala Harris. Some of us are just like really excited because she's like a Black woman. Others of us are like, cool, she's a Black woman, but I can't stand her. And like what does this mean? Like, what does representation mean? How much are we gonna go for like a person who's making history, for like what outweighs the other? Because there was a part of me that was like, I would rather have Elizabeth Warren than Kamala Harris, even though she's not Black, but her politics are more in alignment with mine. Like, there's just like a lot of questions that I think that people just need space to talk about, that does not boil down to getting to the voting booth and voting for Biden. Because I feel like people have made up their minds. People have made up their minds right now, whether they're going to go out and do it or not. But there's much more to this system that I think needs to be flushed out, but people need to feel like they have a space and have the skills to navigate difficult conversations with people and be able to come out the other side and at least like know what are the common threads. So I think like that'll be my role.
Yeah.
Not super thrilled.
I think maybe it serves a bigger purpose, but it's not that exciting. I agree. I'm tired of waiting for the announcement, and the announcement happened, and I'm like,
Okay.
cool, and like, yeah, there's just like none of the things and all the things. So, all right, well, we have been talking a long time. I've taken a lot of your time. Thank you
Oh yeah.
so much for joining me today. Can you tell people how they can follow what you are putting out into the world? And if there are any, I'll put out that New York Times article, Southerners on New Ground. I'll put a link to that website. But are there any other, your social media handles and any other organizations that people should be following and checking out?
Sure. So I work for an organization called Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. So you can find us on all the social medias under Black Lives UU. And our website is blacklivesuu.com. I'm I'm doing work with these really cool creatives. They have created something called Free Black Dirt, and so we're working on getting some things popped off and doing some cultural intervention around defunding the police. Black Visions Collective, which I think most people, if they have ever gotten a link to a place to donate, have donated there. But I think it's important to be following them to keep up with like what are the latest happenings. If you're looking for more information about like defunding the police and like bare bones basics and like learning how to talk about it and like what does it mean, mpd150.com, and they're on social media as well, and at mpd150 you can, that's like a great place that I tell people, like if you're interested in learning about abolition,
Okay.
like this is like the first thing, and you can see what that, like you can like forecast what a campaign could look like in your area. And then I'm on social media, I guess, my website is impaige.com.
Like
I'm
I
Paige.
am.
IMPAIGE.com. It's just like, you can find a way to contact me and get a general sense of who I am on there. I could probably do more with it. And my social media handles are Seriously Paige on all platforms. So Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok.
I haven't yet posted a handle for Snapchat or TikTok because that's how old I am. I don't even know.
It feels unnecessary at this point.
I like it. And I like seeing when those things are put onto the Facebooks because that's something that I can hang with. But
Right.
like, I'm
Honestly,
like, that's a clever little video you put together, like on some other platform that I will
you
never.
don't even need it. You don't need TikTok because all of the highlights you will find on Instagram or Facebook. So
Yeah.
you're not missing out on anything. It's just like another thing to spend time. I mean, it's fun. It can be fun, but it also, I just can't scroll anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, Paige Ingram, thank you so much for all the work you do, for taking the time out of that amazing work to talk with me. Thank you from my own personal standpoint on holding space for me on that retreat, and then continuing to like shape me throughout since then.
I've been following and cheerleading, and I'm just excited because I think that like, I feel like your story is very powerful. And I think that it just shows like what happens when you're able to like take the time that you need to ask the tough questions,
Mm-hmm.
and ask the right questions. Too often we ask ourselves the wrong questions. It's like really digging deeper and then finding your lane and just like going for it. So you are also inspiring me to lean into my passions as well.
I feel like I was like least likely to succeed on our retreat.
You weren't. You weren't.
But it's been awesome. I mean, it's been like one after another of like complete ego destruction and consciousness expansion at the same time. Every time I think, what'd you say?
That's what we all need.
Exactly. Like every time I think I like get a bigger grasp of it, then there's like something else that just levels me again and shows me what now I think is really, really like the way the world is. And then it's like, no, no, no. So now I just know that like I don't know anything, and like it's all process. But anyway, so thank you again for joining me, and thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you.